having Pastor Chris Curran with the Southland Baptist Church lead us in a prayer.
Would you join me in a word of prayer? Father God, we come to you with thanksgiving today. Thank you for another day of life to live and breathe in this world. We have gathered here together to do business, but we've gathered here together because each of us have a great love for this city, San Angelo, and we ask for it to flourish and do well. Lord, as we do business, we pray for wisdom to make the wisest decisions for this city as we move forward. Lord, and as we do business, may we remember the greatest commandment of them all, to love God and to love our neighbor. We pray these things in your Son's name. Amen. Thank you.
Flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Honor the Texas flag.
I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
The consent agenda. The commission may request for a consent agenda item to be moved to the regular agenda for presentation and public comment. Otherwise, the consent agenda will be considered in one vote. Consideration of approving the April 16th, 2018 Planning Commission regular meeting notes. Do I have a motion?
I will make a motion. Approve. Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? 7-0. Regular agenda, special issues. City Council has final authority for approval of special issues. SU 18-01 Zapata. Public hearing and consideration of a request for approval of a special use to allow for placement of a manufactured home on a property in the Ranch and Estate zoning district, being 2.5 acres located at 5333 Gas Plant Road.
Good morning, Planning Commissioners, Chair Stribling. This is Special Use 1801, Zapata, 2.5 acres. The property is located at the northwest of South Gas Plant Road and Shahan Road in SMD number 1, Tommy Hebert's district, Glenmore neighborhood. The future land use is industrial, and the zoning is Ranch and Estate, R&E. So the applicant is requesting for a special use in the Ranch and Estate zone to allow a new manufactured home. Back in early 2017, City Council passed an ordinance. If you're in the RS1 and R&E and a few other districts, you can replace an existing mobile home or manufactured home with a new one within a year. In this case, the applicants had come in for a permit and had already had a mobile home there, and they put the new one down in yellow. You can see on the site plan, the new home is 1376 square feet. When they went to turn the electricity on and through a permits division, it was flagged, and they realized that you can only have one of those on the property with a special use, so that's what we're here to do today. I did find a permit record back in 2000. There was another attempt for a mobile home at that time, and the applicant had actually placed that there and removed it again. So the existing mobile home is still there today. Now, under the new rules today in 2018, you have, in order to get a special use, the following condition has to be met, and it's in the new part of the zoning ordinance. You have to prove within 500 feet that the appraised value is equal to or greater than all of the other single-family homes within 500 feet. So the applicant had done their due diligence, we believe, had hired an appraiser, and the appraiser will go over the statistics in a minute, had proven that it was substantially higher, so it does meet the test. These are some photos looking north and south. The large AEP facility is just to the north. This is looking west at the property. So this is the manufactured home they put down without a permit, so they will need to get it permitted, providing the special use gets approved. The new home is 1,376 square feet. And then there's a carport here, and the existing one, which will be removed, is 460 square feet. These are some of the other homes in the area that the applicant included in the value assessment, 5319, 5301 gas plant. There were substantial amount of other manufactured and mobile homes as well. So again, it's just comparing what the cost would be to other single-family homes on the street. So we looked at the new Section 501F of the ordinance in order to recommend whether or not we should recommend approval or not, and staff does recommend approval based on what we found and what the applicant has provided. The existing mobile home, as mentioned, has been on the property since 2000. The new manufactured home was placed in March 2018 after council approved the ordinance, so allowed them the special use option. We are putting in a condition of approval, however, since they've kind of done this where they've already got the home there and they've put 2 homes there, so they have to move the existing one within 6 months of the approval date, which should be enough time for them to do that, or before final occupancy of the new home. So if they get a permit for the new home, say within a month from now, then they would have to they just basically can't have 2 homes on one lot. The old one will have to go at that time. The property already has been subdivided, so no reason to plat. It exceeds the minimum lot area, frontage, and depth requirements in the R&E zone. The lot area is 2.5 acres, so it's over 2.5 times the minimum lot area, so it complies with all the zoning. One condition of approval is that they'll have to move the home 15 feet from the side yard at the south end. It's about 11 feet 1 inch right now, so the R&E zone requires a 15-foot side yard, so that'll be the other condition of approval. The applicant's staff believes have followed due process and applied for the special use. Also in the zoning ordinance, within 12 months they'll have to obtain a permit anyway, and so they're going to be doing that as a condition of approval. So these are the statistics. The Delvin Albert appraisals, as of April 18th, 2018, they've submitted that appraisal report from that firm. They had determined that the new home was appraised at $90,000. The average single-family home for properties within 500 feet is $56,380. So they're higher by $33,620. So that's pretty substantial, 37.4%. So that's well higher than the average. The new home is also higher than the comparative single-family residence within 1 mile. The appraiser went a step further in this case, which was good. And just in case those homes happen to be of lower value, let's take a mile out, and they still found it was $18,314 higher, 24% less. This is a quick summary of the appraisal report. So you can see 5333 is a subject property, 90,000. There was one home that looked like they had done some renovations, a larger home that was higher, 142,000. All of the others were in the 50 to 60,000 range with a median of 53,000. So again, substantially higher, meets the test for a special use. This is the 500-foot circulation area. There were 10 properties in that area. 2 of them, I believe, or 3 of them already had mobile homes. So again, they're not concerned about that. It was just the other single-family homes. And of the 200-foot notification as required by state, the 8 notices were mailed. We haven't received any letters in support or in opposition. Staff recommendation was to approve this special use to allow for the placement of a manufactured home on a property in the Ranch and Estate R&E zoning district as defined in section 501F of the zoning ordinance, subject to the 2 conditions of approval in your staff report. This concludes staff's presentation. If you'd like me to read them in the record or not, that's fine.
That's sufficient. Does anyone have questions for Mr. Fisher? Okay, let's open it up for public comment. Anyone speaking on behalf, in favor, or opposed to this case? Okay, we're going to close public comment.
Make a motion to accept as written.
We have a motion and a second to accept as written with the conditions
Yes.
that the staff has put out. So let's have a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? None. All right, 7-0. Conditional uses. The Planning Commission has final authority for approval. Appeals may be directed to the City Council. CU 18-09, City of San Angelo Animal Shelter. Public hearing and consideration of a request for approval of a conditional use to allow an animal kennel in the light manufacturing zoning district being 7.85 acres located at 3142 U.S. Highway 67 North.
Good morning, Commissioners. Christina Heredia with the Planning Department. For the record, this is case CU 1809 for the animal shelter. This is to bring the animal shelter into compliance with our current zoning ordinance. Right now, they are considered legal nonconforming. They are 7.85 acres, single-member district number 4 in the Pauline neighborhood. So right now, the future land use is campus institutional, and their zoning is light manufacturing. I have some photos for you. This is the front of the shelter right here. And this photo shows the current parking lot that ends a good distance away from the end of their property. And then this is that same parking lot but the other side. So what the proposed to do is to extend the pavement here, and they would like to place a modular building right here that has been donated to Concho Valley Paz. So here's the site plan. This is the current building that you saw and the current driveway, and then here's that fence that you saw. So they're going to extend it out, put more parking, and then place that modular building. We are recommending approval at this time for several reasons. Number one, the shelter is an existing use. It's been there since the late 1990s. All zoning districts require a conditional use for an animal kennel, so it doesn't matter technically what the zoning is today because they will still have to go through this process. Also, that area is either owned by the city, surrounding area is owned by the city or owned by the county, and it's very low density, so we do not feel that having an animal shelter at that location would have a negative impact on the surrounding property owners. There may be temporary effects to the environment due to the construction process or the placement of the modular, but those would be minor and they would be temporary. We do think that there is a demonstrable community need to have the animal shelter. I have a small statistic here, and that is last year over 1,600 pets were either adopted out or transferred to other rescue groups. And development patterns, it is zoned light manufacturing, but most of the surrounding property is owned by the city and is vacant at this time. So we don't think any development would potentially happen that could have a conflict with the animal shelter being at that location. As you can see here, public notice, 2 notices were mailed out, one to the city because this all here is city owned, and one to the county, and we have received 0 in opposition and 0 in favor. We are recommending approval of a conditional use to allow the animal kennel in a light manufacturing zoning district, subject to one condition, and that is that they get all permits as needed. This is my presentation. Do you have any questions?
Anyone have questions for Ms. Heredia? Okay, thank you. Any public comment? All right. No public comment. Do we have a motion?
I make the motion. We approve as proposed.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? 0, 7-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
CU 18-10, AEP, public hearing and consideration of a request for approval of a conditional use to allow for construction of a telecommunications tower and related facilities in the Ranch and Estate zoning district being 11.213 acres located at 2175 Red Bluff Road.
Good morning, Hillary Bucher, Senior Planner. This is a conditional use for a telecommunications tower near the AEP substation. They had an existing tower, but they are replacing it due to some structural things. So to do that, they would have to come for their conditional use, which had not been applied to the property previously. Again, it's 11.213 acres, about 675 feet west of the intersection of Red Bluff Road and Knickerbocker, SMD number 1 in Nazareth neighborhood. The future land use of this site is transitional, and the current zoning is ranch and estate. You can kind of see a photo here. The old water power would have been here. The substation is here, so the little arrow would delineate where the telecommunications tower is going. I believe that this is the existing one here. There's a couple of towers out there, so when I went and took photos, I believe that's the one they are replacing. So you can kind of see it there looking south toward the tower and then looking southeast down Red Bluff Road. You can see a lot of utilities in this area that are existing due to this substation. So they have a site plan, demonstrates them to be over, it's kind of hard to read here, but they are over 100 feet away from all the property lines. It'll be a self-supporting lattice structure, which the applicant can probably speak more to that actual design, with a maximum height of 120 feet. We are recommending approval. This meets all the standards for the zoning ordinance, and I'm sorry, that's actually 426. The telecommunication towers are required to have a conditional use for R&E zoning, and it's compatible with the surrounding area being mostly undeveloped or commercial. We don't see any anticipated effects on the natural environment, and the tower will provide telecommunication services for AEP. So this, to my understanding, is mostly for their service in an emergency situation. So the development patterns, like I said, it's mostly surrounded by undeveloped or commercial, the developed zoning. 5 notices were mailed out, and we received 0 in favor and 0 in opposition. So staff is recommending approval of a conditional use to allow for construction of a telecommunications tower and related facilities in the ranch and estate zoning, subject to 4 conditions of approval. 1 being a building permit, 2 being that they cannot exceed 120 feet in height as proposed. 3, it should comply with, and I'm sorry, there's an error here, we need to correct this, 426, not 424 of the zoning ordinance. And they shall indicate the final latitude and longitude to locate this in our GIS system. Does anyone have any questions for me?
Any questions for Ms. Bucher?
Thank you.
Thank you. Any public comment? If you please state your name.
Hello, my name is Lila Burns, and my address is 105 Northeast 44th Street in Oklahoma City. I work for Burns Telecommunications Services. We're a consultant for AEP Texas, and I think Hillary did a really good job of kind of covering what we're trying to do. AEP had a guide tower with 4 guide points on the substation and had structural problems, so it has been taken down, actually. But they needed the tower. It's part of their backbone for the surrounding area for emergency situations. So this tower will be 100 feet tall, overall height 120 feet if approved. So do you have any questions for me? Okay.
Thank you. Any more public comment? All right, hearing none. We have a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? 7-0.
Chair Stribling, who was the first? Oh, thank you.
Mr. Smith.
The amendment.
Thank you. Text amendments. City Council has final authority for approval of text amendments. Public hearing and consideration of an amendment to the zoning ordinance, Article 3, creating a new river corridor district overlay, downtown district overlay, and cultural district overlay, identifying their purpose, applicability, and review procedures. Ms. Bucher.
And I think we're going to go and do all of these together, the creation of the text amendments and the zoning boundaries. If you don't mind, go ahead and reading those into the record all the way.
Item B, public hearing and consideration of a text amendment to the zoning ordinance revising the existing standards for Section 211 Historic Overlay Zone and Section 308 HO Historic Overlay Zone to clarify the process for when a certificate of appropriateness is required on properties in historic districts or containing historic landmarks. Would you also like for me to read the rezonings?
Do we read the rezonings as well?
Rezonings. The City Council has final authority for approval of rezonings. Z18-10, River Corridor District, public hearing and consideration of a rezoning to apply the River Corridor Overlay Zoning District to approximately 4,439 acres of property generally located along the Concho River from the eastern to western city limits, including properties that directly adjoin or are a maximum of 2,275 feet from the river's edge. Z18-11, Downtown District, public hearing and consideration of a rezoning to apply the Downtown Overlay Zoning District to approximately 552 acres of property generally located north of Neff's Way, east of South David Street, south of Houston Hart Expressway, and west of North Emmerich Street. Z18-10, Cultural District, public hearing and consideration of a rezoning to apply the Cultural Overlay Zoning District to approximately 64 acres of property generally located north of East Highland Boulevard, east of Russ Street, south of Bakers Street, and west of Hill Street.
Okay. We need to clarify one thing real quick on the cultural district. The agenda read Z1810. It's actually Z1812, just for clarification. So we'll go ahead and move into this. We're going to start with the maps. I know you guys have seen this before, but we want to clarify and go over all this. So this first one you see is just the overall map. It shows the adjoining of the 3 districts. It also demonstrates historical overlay, which is kind of a yellow color. The existing river corridor, as it is today, is kind of a light blue. The green property demonstrates parks, and then kind of that tan is all city-owned property. Okay, let me go back. Let's talk about each of the 3 districts. Previously, the existing river corridor reached into downtown, so it's kind of this area, and there was some confusion as we did these river corridor approvals as to why someone on North Chadburn would be getting river corridor approval. So staff looked at making 3 distinct districts. So that would mean if you were in the purple area, you would need a downtown district approval. It would still go toward the river corridor master plan development. So it would go to DHRC for approval, but this is just for exterior renovations. So we've gone through the list last month about painting, certain types of landscaping, certain types of telecommunications towers, trying to keep that district visually pleasing as well as the other 3. The river corridor changed a little bit. You can see certain areas, one being kind of this area right here. The goal was to take as much of the residential out as we could while still leaving anyone that directly fronts the river. In the caption you saw with a maximum of 2,275 feet, that was just the furthest point we could find just to make sure everybody understood what we were doing. So that is somewhere over here. The rest of them are much closer than that. Finally, the cultural district is encompassing a lot of the fort, and then what we existingly call Old Town District, the parks, Station 618. So it's a lot of those buildings that already have some sort of historic overlay, just creating a district around them to protect the view of that area. So this is from previous month, just a summary for everyone in the audience. We talked about the creation of the 3 proposed overlay districts and the new overlays to reflect the current development pattern. We felt that the old river corridor maybe didn't reflect what we are currently doing. We revised the application process with the creation of the new standards, what would be administrative and what would be automatically going to DHRC. So new process for improvements within each of the 3 districts. We talked about repealing the old river corridor ordinance and the Old Town District. These new districts would cover those areas and kind of give us a whole feeling around those areas. I think Jeff's gonna take over from here.
So these are the, Hillary did a good job explaining sort of how we got here and the reason for the 3 different districts. We're going to go just a little bit further here on some of the portion of the text amendments that came in as part of that. So the proposed changes, including the ones from last month, we've now arrived at each of those districts becomes an overlay on the actual zoning map itself. So that's why you have the 3 items there. So we're actually, first is we're creating the 3 new overlay district zones in the zoning ordinance. So that's 309, 310, and 311. Each of those zoning districts, and you've got a copy in your staff report of all of the text. We don't want to put it just on here to be too much detail, but basically going to have an overall purpose, applicability, and in the future will allow for design standards specific to those districts. So for now, somebody comes in and goes to the DHRC, they're still going to be subject to the current standards, which is the River Corridor Master Plan. In the future, if you're in the cultural district, these new zoning sections will have specific policies for the cultural district Hillary was mentioning, the downtown district if you're downtown, and then if you're still one of the properties along the river, those will be specific as well. So that'll be an ongoing process. Secondly, is the maps themselves will be amended. That's why a lot of people are here today that were in one of those 3 areas, and so we've sent out the notifications to everyone. So your current zoning isn't going to change. If you're zoned CG or you're zoned CBD, that's still going to regulate the use of your property. But the overlay district will now have certain design standards, and that's kind of what we talked about last month. So, changing the paint color on your building, getting a permit for, changing it from, say, brick to stone on the facade. Those things will now have an overlay and will be subject to design standards as well. So you'll still have the uses of your land, whatever the zoning district allows, will still continue. And thirdly, third part of this, I guess, is a bit of a cleanup. We're revising a lot of Section 211, which talks about designating a historical property, a landmark or a district, or getting a certificate of appropriateness for new develop in those historical areas, was kind of repeated in Section 308. It didn't make sense. So as a cleanup, some of the sections of 308, which I'll go over very briefly in a minute, are now going to be combined into 211 where they really belong. That's the process for if your property is designated historical. So these are essentially the 3 new sections, and all of our staff worked really hard on this, each one of us at a different district. So we had a river corridor, so there's the purpose, to protect and enhance the economic, cultural, and historical resources. That's the goal. Applicability, it applies to all the properties in that district. Review procedures will follow the new Section 212 we kind of talked about last month. So certain things we were mentioning on that, remember that table, if you're like changing the paint color or landscaping could be approved by the planning director. There'd be an appeal to the DHRC after that. Other things the DHRC wanted a bit more control on, so any new construction on exterior construction on a building would go to the DHRC. So if you're changing the materials on a building, before if you were under 1,200 square feet, could be administratively done as proposed. This would now go to the DHRC. So again, the new 212 essentially breaks down what can be approved by planning director, what can be approved by the DHRC. And again, in each of these districts, there'll be a boundary map associated with it in the staff report. So the cultural district and the river corridor and the downtown. These are the actual map amendments, 1810, 1811, and 1812. I won't go over that, Hillary already has, but as you can see, that's a fairly large area. The river corridor is still the predominant part of town, 4,439 acres of land in there. So the final section here is basically taking some of the repeated parts in 308 and moving them to 211. That's all this really is. So designating a historical landmark, for example, which was always under 212, once we create a new 212 for these standards, will now become 213. That's all that is. The second change, 211E, certificate of appropriateness is required for new construction, and it lays out all the different types of exterior construction. This includes any addition to or expansion of an existing building. That language was again taken out of 308 and moved to 211 where it belongs to avoid duplication. One of the things that we also changed is the certificate of appropriateness. There was a date that said we had to basically make a decision and hold a hearing within 45 days. Because the DHRC only meets once a month, and due to holidays and changes, that would be difficult to always meet that provision. So we've taken that out, but in terms of normal procedure shouldn't change. As soon as we get an application, we put that on the next agenda as soon as we can. So again, a lot of this is just for clarity and to avoid any duplication. This concludes staff's presentation. I think everything else is in there. So if anyone has any questions or comments or wants to open it up to the public.
So I have a couple things I wanted to add. I think Jeff and Hillary did a great job, and staff in general, but the three of them, well, all of us, but the three of them in general just really worked so hard to put this in front of you, to do all of this work. Many of the people that you see here today were notified of this public hearing as a result of a 2,000-plus mailing that we did to residents within each one of the districts, but more importantly, within 200 feet of the district. So many people received a notification about these changes, which are not even, who may not even be within one of the districts. And so we do that. There's nothing in the zoning ordinance that says that we have to do anything specifically other than what we would do for normal rezoning. And so that's what we did. But we tried to do it in such a way that it was equal and transparent to everybody. So there, as a result, there's some confusion because some people think they may be in the overlay and some people think they may not. They've been calling us. As people call, we let them know if they're in there or if they're not and why they were notified. And so again, staff has been taking care of that. But I wanted to make you aware that the folks who were notified of these changes may or may not be within the overlay. We had to notify within 200 feet of the overlay as well. You have already reviewed, but has not gone to City Council, the changes of what goes before the DHRC and what goes before, what's administratively reviewed or what goes before John. Much of what we changed and what you saw last month significantly narrowed the scope of what would be reviewed by residential. That is, most or a lot of residential will not be included within these overlays unless it can be viewed from the river, like if it was in the river corridor, if it could be viewed from the river. If it happened to be within downtown or if it happened to be within a cultural district, we'll take that into account as we do the standards, and certainly as we apply the new regulations as to what can be reviewed administratively or what can be reviewed by DHRC. And within those standards, we've already delineated if you're residential. There's only a certain amount of things we're going to look at. So I wanted to make those additional clarifications moving forward, because I think that's going to address a lot of concerns that the folks have, I think, that we've been hearing. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
You think, excuse me, do you think that you could help clarify what would be administratively approved in relatively short fashion? Because I think that I'm going to assume that the process of going through approvals and DHRC approvals and Planning Commission approvals, adding time is always a concern for anyone that's trying to make improvements to their property.
And first, before I say that, just a reminder that, as you can see on the map, much of this area is already within the current river corridor.
Yes, sir.
So for a vast majority of the properties, this is really not a change. They're already in the river corridor, and they will be in one of these new corridors. I'm not going to go through all of these, but one of the big changes is that many things that now require going through the DHRC will be able to be approved administratively. And for example, this will add the opportunity for review of paint colors, as has been discussed, but that can be reviewed by staff. That would not have to go through the DHRC. You know, any new building construction would have to be reviewed. Signs, any signs in any of these corridors would have to be reviewed, but we've changed many more of those signs under a certain size would be administratively reviewed rather than the DHRC. Yeah, and any lit signs as well. I'm trying to pick out the big changes here, but that's kind of a summary of the changes.
That'll work. Thank you.
So I have a question for staff. So we had this issue before in the past where you sent out notification that was way beyond the 200 feet that is required, and it caused an issue then. At that time, it was at the lake, and now the downtown area. Is this something that you're going to start doing all the time, or
No,
what?
in fact, based on those previous discussions, when we did notify a larger area, in this case, we did not. We only went out the 200 feet.
Okay, I thought Rebecca said 200 feet beyond the area.
Well, yes, state law requires us, anytime there's a rezoning, we have to notify everyone affected plus everyone within 200 feet of that. And so that's what we've done. In the past, we have sometimes notified beyond the 200
Correct,
feet.
which was a nightmare.
But so in this case, if you picture this whole boundary in red, for example, we not only notified everybody within the red, but we had to go out 200 feet from that. So a lot of the notifications went to folks that aren't actually within the area affected.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else have questions for the staff before we move forward? Okay, we're going to begin with public comment. I'm going to open the floor. Anyone who would like to speak in favor or against? And I'm going to limit the discussions to 3 minutes. So when you come up, if you'd please state your name before you start. And when this timer starts going off, I may have to interrupt you. So 3 minutes, please.
I have a question. If I received a letter, is that a conflict of interest?
No, sir, we got that same question as well. You're fine.
Good morning. My name is Michael Richter of 4401 Brook Hollow Lane. I'm here in support of the separation of these 3 zoning districts. I own property in the downtown district as well as the River Corridor district here. I have rental properties along the southern edge of the river by Bell Street. One concern that I do have is I am foreseeing development along that river edge, and I don't know what that's going to look like for me in the future. So I'll need to see what the rules look like as they shift out, because they're going to be developing over time. But since we're acting on the rules as they exist today, I can get with Planning Commission and work on what we have based on right now until things change. So that's great. I appreciate that I don't have conflicting sets of rules for my building downtown at this point, where I can go to one district and get one set of rules aside from the city. I appreciate that. That's something that I really like about this. Something that I did not like about the issue of how we were informed is the maps on the notification were rather small and difficult to read. So when we're looking at the white compared to the light blue, it was very difficult to look at what the previous river corridor was compared to the unzoned thing. So something for future notification's sake. Thank you so much for your time. Make it a great day.
Thank you.
Morning. Kendall Hirschfeld. I know a lot of you guys up there and lady. You know, I'm all in favor of us trying to manage and maintain some semblance of order, so there's some consistency in how we do things. The challenge I've got, because I own multiple properties in the downtown area, and some of which are now, you know, would be included that weren't included before. So now I'm going to have new requirements put on some of my properties that I didn't have, that I recently purchased, that now all of a sudden you're stumbling. This really boils back down to the problem I've got is probably with the DHRC, because, you know, a quote you said is the DRHC wants more control, okay? I have a big problem with that, because I think the DRHC has too much control right now. And step back for just a second and say, I was on city council. I was one of those guys that sat up there and said, we need to do something to pull together the river corridor. We had the historic overlay. We had all these different together, and you could go from one here to one there, and each one giving you different answers. So the purpose of that was great, and the intent looked good on paper. But unfortunately, I think that we've got a DHRC that kind of oversteps their bounds. And if you even ask them and ask some of the staff that goes through this thing, that their purpose is to say, does the building look how I want it to look? Okay? I don't think that's their job. I think their job is to say, does it meet with compliance? Does it meet with the standards and guidelines and parameters that we all set out? As long as we all know the rules, as long as we all know the layout of how these things come together, then I think it can all work. It's going to, the process now of saying that DRHC needs more control is a bad thing. It's a bad thing. Now, that's something I know I need to deal with my council and the mayor and everyone like that to try to resolve some of that. But there are people on there that have agendas and people that want to try and bring what they feel is the right thing for there, because I see it this way. People need to all have pink doors. I don't like that color of green. Seriously. And I think that is going way beyond what is legitimate and appropriate. So while I'm not opposed to all of these things, I think there's a fine line of defining exactly what is right, what is wrong, and how much control can go into these things. You know, I'd be interested to hear far more what, you know, y'all gave like the 10-second version of what could be administrative. I would love to see the nuts and bolts, because that's where the devil's in the details. And that's where you end up getting stuck. And I know I'm probably out of time by now. So anyway, and again, maybe the last thing is, why the purpose of changing all this? Why? I mean, is what we have, other than my problem with the DHRC, is there something wrong with what we've got other than trying to expand the areas out and add more?
Thank you, Mr. Hirschfeld. We have anyone else that would like to speak?
I'm Kay Reed. I represent Tom and Kay Reed. We own a home at 1621 Christoval Road. We've received nothing but the letter for today. That's it. We don't know anything about what your plans are, nothing about the constraints, nothing about the changes, because not one mailing or any identification of that has come to us. So my question to you is, why? Why have we heard none of this until we got the letter about the meeting today? We've had zero.
Well, again, we sent out 2,000, we had to send out 2,000 pieces of information, and so our intent was to provide the required amount of information on there, and to address the previous concern as well. We realized that this map is very difficult to see, but there was no way in a mailing we could provide that. We did provide a website address on the mailing.
What we would like, or what I'd like to see, are what are your proposals to produce behind my area of my home that I pay taxes on. I don't want someone telling me what I can and cannot do on that. I go to the river, and my understanding legally from when we purchased it, there's not a easement thing. It's on the other side where the cotton fields are at. So where do we find this information, what your long-term project planning is for on production or whatever you're going to do with that corridor behind our house of the river? Because as it stands right now, it's not part of the cultural district. What we see you're infringing on are the rights of the people, not just ours, but of people that come who love that piece of the property on that river. I see kayakers, boater, fishermen in their canoes. They love that property because it's quiet. It doesn't have a million people on it. It's got a beautiful park down there, which is very well maintained and utilized. But we really see a lot of activity from people who are there for the solitude. They don't want the production like we have the running trails, and then you get the graffiti. And I know from my own self that they have come into my yard and stolen my boat. So I will have a no trespassing sign at the end of my property. I do not have a fence on it. And if someone needed to sit there to eat a sandwich, I probably wouldn't get excited. But what I don't want is easy access to the back of my property by anybody who wants to come up it because the city decides it needs to be part of some beautification project. So what I would like to see, and you need to tell me where I need to go to get it, where do I find the exact data of what your future plans are for that part of the river? That's for me personally to know where I need to start the process if I need to dispute this or not go along with it.
And I can answer that question. I think that's been some confusion for some of the properties. This is not about a plan for improvements to the river corridor. If any of that were to happen, that would be through the city's Parks Department. And so nothing that we're doing here today is about any city activity that will go on or near the river. What this is about is regulating the properties adjacent to the river. If new development does come in, that it is not detrimental to the river. And so it's not about the city actually going out and doing anything. It's about reviewing any development that happens near the river to ensure that it's compatible with the river.
That is the first step for control by the city. So I'm sorry, I too disagree with this violently. I think this is one more step of city government stepping onto personal property rights. And I feel like they don't really need to tell me. I think most of the homes over there are very well kept, but I didn't buy that home to make it beautiful for the city of San Angelo to tell me what color to paint my house. So I, for one, and my husband, I speak for the two of us, we oppose it directly and very conclusively that we do not think this is a good idea. I think the river corridor is beautiful downtown, but I think you need to stop encroaching on personal property rights of people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reed.
I have a question. So wouldn't her property have been included in the river corridor long before now because it's along the river?
Well, no, and if we're talking Cristobal Road here, you can see the blue stopped, I believe, at this point. And so the new corridor does include some properties a little bit farther. But again, most of the property along the river anywhere in town was already in the river corridor, but there are a few locations like that location that is not currently in. And I just add one more thing. In the notice that went out, the web link that was on that notice did include a link to full versions of all of these maps, as well as the summaries and ordinance change proposal that does have more detail if anybody's interested in reading that.
Okay. Anyone else like to speak?
I'm C.D. Word, 1719 Catalina Drive. I'm the person I think she was talking about that they overlaid too many notices for at Lake Nasworthy on the island. And it was pretty much a railroad deal through the city. And I didn't appreciate it. And I don't get a warm, fuzzy feeling when I get a paperwork from the city. And I want a clarification on the 2,275 feet rule. The way that's written, it sounds like it's encompassing to 2,275 feet of the river's frontage, which would probably grab my house. And then the next question is, what is the implications of what you got to do to your property? I mean, that's kind of a gray area. They're not saying what you're shoving us into. So I'm not for it. And I don't see a lot of people that are here that maybe own property on the river that adjoin it directly. And I want a clarification on what's going on here, and I'll let them know what's going on so they can be at the city council meeting if y'all pass this.
Thank you, sir.
If I could add a clarification just for those, the previous speaker, I'll just note she was mentioning Cristobal Road. All of those properties on Cristobal Road are not included within the river corridor. They only got the notice because they were within 200 feet. As Rebecca mentioned, one of the things we attempted to do with this, we've talked a little bit about areas that were not in the corridors that are now in. There's a significant amount of area that was in the river corridor that now would be outside, and most of those are residential properties. So we tried to, I think that one of the goals of this is to address non-residential, and so in that example, these properties along Cristobal Road are not included and so would not be regulated whatsoever.
They were not before.
They were not before,
and they still are
they're
not.
now.
Okay, it's in the red area that says new river corridor.
No, this through here, this red area runs right along the river, so the properties that front the river on the Cristobal Road side are not included.
Okay.
The lot goes all the way back.
The what, the which?
I think they're saying the river edge is the
lot
boundary.
goes all the way from Cristobal Road, goes back to the river.
But the river corridor, the regulation of the river corridor just ends at the river bank, so it does not include their properties.
What's done on their property is not impacted. I understand.
In this particular area, the properties that you see in yellow are actually city-owned. So there's a portion of the lots that back onto the river where their property ends and I'm sorry. So if you look at the map in front of you, all these yellow pieces, or most of these yellow pieces, are city-owned properties. And so in this area, this yellow that you see in there, where the red lines literally run adjacent to, everything on the inside of that red is city-owned property. So when we tried to follow the corridors or make these corridors, the majority of the properties that we chose along that area were all city-owned properties. And those were meant to not only protect the river, but to protect the residential or the developments around these corridors to make sure that A, they were notified as to anything. If anything comes in the future and you're next to this corridor, you're gonna find out what's coming. You're gonna have a chance to speak, and you're gonna have a chance to be heard. And so that was one of the biggest, I think that was one of the biggest impetuses for us to create it in this way, was to make sure that folks had a chance to be heard, and they had a chance to know it was coming, and that the residential was taken out for the most part from these areas so that you wouldn't have to go through this process of having to get permission if you wanted to change the color of your building. So we really did try to scale it back and to include properties that were non-residential, and to include properties and to make sure that properties that were next to these areas knew what was happening next to them. So that's at least what I can tell you about this particular corner. I'm sorry, ma'am, I know you wanted to speak. I apologize.
No.
Okay.
Is Miss Reed still in the audience somewhere? You step out. There are properties that line the riverfront across from Santa Fe Park. Are those properties in the river corridor?
Hillary? I'm sorry. Can you
There are properties that line the riverfront across from Santa Fe Park. Yes, there are residential properties, yes. Are those properties in the river corridor?
So the ones that directly front the river are.
Are?
They are, if they directly front the river. So if your backyard looks onto the river, those are included. But you can see, and I wish we could zoom in, if you can see this like light blue area that was beyond that, we actually took as much out as we could, knowing that we're trying to protect that view corridor. So if you can, our thought was if you're on the river and you can directly see the property, that's probably important to maintain that, to make sure that the natural environment, everything, the view corridor is protected. But beyond that, we were trying to, there's areas here, there's areas here, there's areas over here. We were trying to take out as much residential as we could.
Okay, and just to clarify, what you've done in that area of the river corridor is not the same as what we've done on Cristobal Road.
No.
No, sir.
Those properties are not in,
No, those properties were always in the river corridor.
no, I understand. I was talking about the Cristobal Road properties.
Yes,
Okay.
the Cristobal Road, the only
Ms. Reed
properties
back in
we,
the-
the only properties we included along Cristobal Road, there is one private property, sorry, I thought that was an arrow, right there. It's a little bitty box. The rest of them were city-owned property or parks.
Okay. So Ms. Reed, are you back in the room? So do you understand that it would be the western boundary of your property is the boundary for this river corridor? And that your home, your lot is not included in this river corridor? Not with these standards, no, ma'am. Thank you. Okay.
My name is Sharon Alexander. My husband John and I just recently purchased along Christoval Road. 1829 Christoval Road is our address. I didn't receive a notice like several of my other neighbors. We didn't receive a notice at all. But I did get a phone call, so that's why I'm here. In the discussion concerning what the city owns, you didn't mention that many of us have a long-term lease with the city for the property up to the river, right? So any concerns or whatever, we don't own that property, but we do have a long-term lease. So legally, we'd have to figure out what that meant. And my concern, though, has to do with how come city staff has made these decisions about extending these borders. In the past, I believe that our city mayors and administrators have assigned committees and groups of citizens to make decisions about those boundaries. So the fact that our city staff, who does a great job, and I really like working with y'all, I've done that in the past on some commissions that I've served on, and you are very smart, great people, but why were you given the authority to make these decisions about the extension of these corridors and where they should be laid? 4,429 acres is a lot of land, a lot of responsibility to be reviewed and constantly watched over by our city. So I'm wondering how or why the city was given this responsibility. Also, I might suggest on your map, if you're going to have river corridors, the old river corridors blue like the river, I mean, it's difficult to tell from this map because the river's blue and the corridor's blue, the old corridor, which is what the old one was. But I would suggest maybe a different color, purple maybe. But anyways, I am, of course, opposed to anything that would require more regulation that wasn't helpful, and we don't know exactly how this is going to work out. But I'm glad that you're taking public hearings because all of this affects our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alexander.
I have a question. Can this affect riparian rights? Okay, go ahead.
This is completely separate from that.
I'm Georgia Edwards. My husband Sam and I own a home at 1525 Christoval Road. I'm a part of this group that's concerned about more city oversight. But I'm going to address my understanding, and I've worked with the TCEQ on, that's not even what it's called anymore, on several projects, because I'm a senior water rights holder on the main Concho River. So I do know a little bit about that, not as much as probably you guys do. But I thought that because I own to the river, I have riparian rights, and I'm pretty sure that those rights say that I own to the center of the river. So I would be happy if you move that red line to the center of the river. I think that would be the appropriate thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Edwards.
There are certain areas around town that do own the river, so it would be the center.
And I think in this context, only if they were planning to do something in the river itself would they have to come apply
Right.
for anything. And
The only thing that I see as an issue, though, is, okay, we're doing this, it's May 2018, and in 20 years when they come in and they start doing other things, then it's not going to be the Edwards, it's going to be their children or someone else that's there that doesn't have the background of what happened today. So, it needs to be drawn correctly as to what the property lines are.
I guess my answer to that would be we don't necessarily draw the zoning lines to the property line. We draw them to the boundary of the area that we are trying to protect.
Right,
And
but
in
we
this
also,
case-
on rezoning on other properties, we draw the boundary line to the property dimensions.
Generally, but not always. And there are some cases where property lines are split by the zoning district boundaries. Again, I don't know that we would have a problem drawing it to the center of the because if we leave it at the river's edge, we still wouldn't be regulating what they do on the land. We would only regulate anything they would do from the river edge out into the river, which I would suspect would be either nothing or perhaps a dock or something like that, which I would argue is something we probably need to be looking at anyway. And I would add, based on the previous comment, just in terms of process and how we do this, you all really are the comment was asked, why did the staff get the authority to do this? Number one, this was reviewed by the Development or the Design and Historic Review Commission, the DHRC. They gave a recommendation to you all. You and the city council are the ones who make a decision, so we're simply bringing you a recommendation. We have not made any decisions, and this meeting today is the opportunity for the public to raise any objections. And if history is any guide, citizen objections can weigh heavily on your decision and the city council's decision.
Thank you. Do we have any more public comment?
Paul Pascal, I've got the remainder of 3 buildings left on the 500 block of South Chavern. Your DRHC is way overstepping their boundaries. A little history lesson: when we built Howard's Museum, which is a beautiful thing, they scraped a whole lot of good businesses off with the eminent domain. Those people didn't want to leave. They were happy with where they are. We got parking lots now. My buildings, we had to utilize your own historic overlay, or they were going to scrape me off for parking. And if you own something and they're threatening you with eminent domain, it's not any fun. You're helpless. So you need to think real long and hard about what you do today and what color you paint a door before you make a decision that's going to go from now on. Because like I said, seeing you change something, you know, we got the historic overlay just to keep us from getting scraped off. And those buildings would be gone now, and Colmeyer would be gone. You know, I don't know if it's still that way, but the master plan has it from the Fort to Bryant as clear space. There's a lot of real estate in there. So y'all make the right decision.
Thank you, Mr. Pascal.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Tom Early. I'm president of the San Angelo Health Foundation. Unfortunately, I was out of town this week, and the website, the background information didn't come up till Friday, so I haven't had a chance to look at that. And I think you owe the citizens the right to do that. I guess we own some property on the river, and our goal is the same as yours. We bought it to try and preserve it and do something good for the community. When you look at the master plan, actually, which we helped fund, and they did a special emphasis on the downtown area. All the consultants, everybody said, if you want to revitalize your downtown area, you got to get more people living there. So I guess what I'm a little bit concerned about is what are the rules, regulations, restrictions, et cetera, are going to be in terms of new development. And because that's what we have our eye on, is trying to get some new development and new construction on the properties that we own to get more people living down there. That's kind of the direction we're going. So I don't know if that's built in now or if there will be a chance to look at regulations, restrictions, et cetera, down the road. I guess that's a question because you keep emphasizing, well, regulations to follow. And I think before you approve the zoning overlay, we ought to approve the whole package and have a chance for folks to comment on what the rules and regulations and guidelines are going to be instead of just doing it piecemeal. So that's my observation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And just as a reminder, the rules and regulations that are in place today will continue. That's not changing, with the exception of some of those things being shifted to administrative staff review rather than the DHRC. So today, no rules are changing.
Good morning. Howard Taylor, Director of the Art Museum and also Chair of the San Angelo Cultural District. And first I'd like to correct something Paul said. The Art Museum did not scrape those properties. Bad news, the city did, actually. There were houses and buildings there that were part of the community, and if it were up to us, that would not have occurred. But we're there now at the invitation of the city, and we built the museum, and also we have acquired adjacent property, an entire block that I think is now a model for the city in terms of design and what I'd like to see occur in other parts of the city with a very deep commitment to the community and pedestrian use and so forth. But what I really wanted to talk about, I kind of want to second what Tom said first. We got notification about this, but one must admit, unless you're a part of the planning team, a lot of this is a little hard to decipher. I'll bet you 90% of the people here scratch their head, and then when it comes time to you know, submit a proposal or something, you really have to deal with it, look at the regulations, and that can be a little bit challenging and arcane as well. What I really want to talk about, well, two things. Tom reminded me of the Cultural District. The Cultural District is not a trademarked name, but the San Angelo Cultural District is essentially a state designation. So that's a legal description that was awarded through the Texas Commission on the Arts, and it's certified by the state, and we had to go through a process with the City Council and the county commissioners. I truly have not had an opportunity to digest what these boundaries mean. But my real concern is not that so much as what Tom said. The design standards, the ideas, the criteria. Now, the museum has been where we are for 20 years, and I've appeared before the DHRC and previously with the River Corridor Commission when it was separate, and the Historic Commission. Overall, that experience has not been bad. But at times it's been very challenging because a lot of the things that were tossed at us, not recently, but it did happen, were very arbitrary, things that to me made no sense and that didn't come out of any kind of real standard, but a comment by an individual. And it really was very difficult and very challenging. And we had quite a debate over one thing where, well, I won't even get into the details of it, but it was just, it made no sense at all. And the museum knows a little bit about aesthetics, but we don't go in presuming we know everything, and we're very willing to have a dialogue about this, you know, so that we do understand. And I do think that what the staff is attempting to do is create efficiency, and so I don't dispute that at all, but I think that we really need more information, particularly about the design standards. I think we need to take a more careful look at that and how they're applied. Because we have had some you know, confusion. I think the process itself is a challenge. Recently, we had a very substantial delay because of a review that we had to go through that we didn't think we had to, and we thought we had resolved that. And it cost us quite a lot of money because we were operating on a grant, and the time expired on that, and we weren't able to complete the project in time, and that really hurt us pretty badly. And I think developers could, you know, probably tell you some stories as well if they're delayed. That 45-day thing to me is an awfully long extension for review. And I know it's a challenge because you're working with citizen committees, but frankly, I think when important things come up, there should be a more frequent process. You know, you put these things off for a long time, or people are on vacation or things like that, they can't get a quorum. You know, you're really putting people in a very bad position. So I'm really, really concerned more about the process and the guidelines. And I think that what I'm hearing from Tom and from a lot of people, because we are struggling a little bit with the boundaries and what they imply, is to really take an in-depth look at how that's applied. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Council, I'm Steve Sherrod. I'm a property owner at 3030 South Chadbourne in the south end of the new proposed properties, and there's a number of citizens along there, and I was glad you did answer Mr. Stribling, so I don't have to get my wife to come down every time she wants to paint on the house, because you don't want that. Anyway, but I do lease about 15 or 16 acres from the city that is the yellow. I don't know how to point.
You can touch the screen.
It's okay, you can paint on the screen.
Just touch it.
Yes, sir.
That's property right in here. And I own about 60-something acres in there, but also lease another 15 acres there along that. And I know my house actually sits about 18 inches from where the city property starts, the corner of my house. I think a lot of us we see this proposal of taking in this, and that's probably a pretty large percentage of this extra acreage, I would think, when we look at the 4,000-something acres.
The other side is farmland that Steve Hosher farms and I think owns a lot of it. I think it's also been the proposed site for the big water retention thing on the Arroyo. There's been talk about that on the other side of the river, but that is city property. I think our concern is what is the reason for this being brought in under this oversight at this time? Because there's no development there, and when I talked to the planners, when I talked to Hillary, she said there's no plans to do anything. I think a lot of us have a concern if we're going to make that a public park, or we're going to have public access where people are going to be in our backyards that we don't know. I mean, you know, and we do lease that. And I think that's a concern. And I guess my question is there really a need for this to be brought in at this time when it appears that y'all have enough to take care of at this time? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Sherrod.
CD word again. I asked for a clarification of the 2,275-foot clause, and nobody's said anything about it. So
I can clarify that. When we did, I'm gonna speak it. Wow, never had anybody tell me to speak louder. I'm sorry. Rebecca Garrett, Planning Manager. When we did the general descriptions on the agenda, we went out and picked properties like this one over here. Hold on. Do you see this property over here and this property over here? Well, in order for us to give a very general description of the area, we went out as far as the furthest parameter goes so that we would be under the legal requirements to have a general description of an area. Not all properties are 175 feet away. Most of the properties are much closer than that. But in order for us to encompass all the properties that we were intending to be part of this overlay, I had to pick the furthest part and move in. So we gave what was to the north, what was to the south, what was to the east, and what was to the west when we gave the general description. It doesn't mean that everything within 175 feet is included. I'm sorry. No. Oh, I'm sorry, 2,000. Doesn't mean that everything within that area was included. It just means that that's the furthest edge. And so that was the most general description that we can get. When we write the ordinance, when this goes to City Council, we will, by law, and this legal department will make us put an absolute legal description that describes the exact parameters of where each one of the overlays runs. This was just for notifying purposes to meet the minimum standards required by state statute. Does that answer your question, sir? I don't know where you went. Does that answer your question, sir? I understand, and I apologize if that was how it's perceived. But the only response I can give you is that based on this map, and based on what we will bring before City Council, it will not. It will not be that far, but for general purposes of description of the general area, this is what we put down. So it'll be the map. Okay, so when we go to City Council, which is scheduled to be on July 17th,
in this case, the legal description will be the map, but as we mentioned, this map, a more detailed version of it's on the city website that you can actually zoom into and see exactly where the lines fall and whether a property is in or out, and that's available today.
The written description will likely change when we write the ordinance. It won't be as encompassing. We'll work more closely with engineering, with legal, and quite frankly, probably with real estate to make sure that we have a tighter description of what it was.
But the boundaries are set. The boundaries have already been set. We're looking at this map.
Yes.
Yeah, the boundaries are not changing.
The boundaries, at this point, legally, the boundaries can only change by excluding properties. We could not expand it without starting over the process.
All right. Any more public comment?
Sir, my name's Stephen Holscher. I've got the property, the Red Arroyo, and I'm Mr. Cottonfield right here in this area here. Y'all are taking on, I operate that. I don't really see anything that's going to affect farming, that's going to change anything. The big thing that I see happening, and I've made a lot of meetings like this in regulatory. I've been all over the United States from California to DC. Regulatory is good to make sure we do it right, that we don't go too far or offend people with what we do with the improvements in our land. What I've seen in regulatory all the way from city level, all the way to the federal level, to the EPA, WOTUS, everything all the way from top to bottom. If we have regulatory that becomes political, it doesn't take too long. Some people get singled out, and businesses tend to not go to those areas. If we allow this thing to become a burden of regulatory on everybody here, everybody that's in these corridors, you're not just going to see businesses leave, you're going to see businesses not come here, period. And if you want to improve the downtown area, and you want more people to live there, you want people from our area right here that live in town to support the downtown area. We want it to be done right. And you want those people that live here, to work here, have businesses here, and operate here. If we make this thing so high and so tight, the only people that can afford to come in here is going to be outside businesses, big business. And I think we want to keep everything local the best we can. I farm that yellow section right there. I'm the cotton field man. And I don't know how it's going to affect my farming abilities. I have the right to farm, but it could come to a point we just let it go and get out of here. And I can tell you, just from the meeting I had this morning with several constituents around the city of San Angelo, that money's not going to come to San Angelo. And I'm talking some pretty big money because of not just this, but what has happened in the past practices. So I think we need to all look at what's going on. I've been served with condemnation papers there 3 times. It's tough. We get through it. We work through it. We talk. City staff, everybody talks. Everything has come out good. But we do not want to have over-regulatory oversight that can become political. Once that happens, I hate to say it, but our community will be lost. Thank you.
Mr. Olsher.
Williams. I live at 2525 Cristobal Road. It looks like our land that almost goes all the way back to that city lease along the river is not going to be affected. But my question is, with the river corridor going in that Cristobal Road area along the river, how will that affect our property taxes? Because I know that's kind of jumping ahead, but that was my biggest concern when I got that letter is having 5.7 acres, we already pay a pretty good amount on property taxes each year. So how would this affect that? Being right up close to the river corridor, would that affect my property taxes? I don't know who can answer that.
I don't think anyone up here can answer that.
Okay. So we don't know how this is going to affect property taxes of the people who are going to be in these areas or along these areas. Okay. Who do I find out that information from?
That would probably be the appraisal district.
Okay. All right. I'll go to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams.
I'm Mark Brown. Appreciate y'all's service on this commission. I know it's tough issues that y'all face. I'm a homeowner on Baker Street, which is within the river corridor. That Baker Street's on the bluff that overlooks the South Concho River back behind Fort Concho. I'm also a commercial property owner downtown on South Irving Street. I think the idea of telling property owners what color they can paint their buildings is absolutely absurd. And it shows the difference in philosophy between the planning department and everybody that lives in San Angelo and owns property. That's just absurd. That's going way too far in controlling things. I think you need to cut that out completely. Painting is not construction. It's not plumbing or electrical or structural things that involve safety issues. That's why you get building permits and you have codes you have to comply with. Somebody's opinion about the color is totally discretionary, and if you own the property, if you pay the taxes, you pay the insurance, you maintain it, you took the risk, you ought to be able to decide what color you paint your commercial property or your house. Apart from getting rid of that change about painting, I think you should just exempt residences. There are lots of residences in this river corridor, and the idea that I have to pay $195 and ask permission from the planning commissioner or administrator to paint the outside of my house, that's ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. That's just ridiculous. And this isn't California. It's not China. It's Texas. And we shouldn't have that level of public involvement in someone's homestead. You know, it's not even a commercial facility where you're trying to maybe run a business. It's just where you live. And a second issue is this landscaping. The way I read it, they're saying if you want to landscape in the public right-of-way, you've got to get permission and apply. Well, I understand that if you're talking about sidewalks downtown. But what about your front yard at your house? The street comes into your yard a certain distance. That's public right-of-way. Now I've got to get permission to plant a tree or to cut down a tree or put a big rock out there if it's in the public right-of-way. I think that's ridiculous if you're talking about residences. So I would cut out the whole thing about painting, and I would treat residences within the river corridor very differently from how you treat businesses. But I certainly think businesses, too, are entitled to paint their building whatever color they want. And finally, that notice, I felt like, was just not adequate in terms of the changes that are being made. It didn't say anything that painting is now construction. That is a huge philosophical change in the code. The website address just takes you to the planning department. I'm not sure when you get there that you can immediately see these changes.
Mr. Brown, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the time's expired.
That's fine.
Thank you, sir.
The notice could have been a whole lot better. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Gloria Hollis. I live on the other side of Santa Fe Park District, and I guess we're in the River Corridor area. I live in the Bradford Addition, which is on the other side of the river. Well, what my question is I bought some land, some pastoral land over there, and I'm concerned of is it going to be in the River Corridor? I don't know. This map I can hardly tell. Again, everybody else had commented on it. So I live at the dead. My house is on the last house on the left, on the dead end, and there's some undeveloped land there. So I just was wondering what's going to happen to the animals and the deer and everything else, you know, that God put on this earth. And I just wanted to see if I can have like a rundown where is the corridor going to go? Is it going to go up all the way up to my land, my pasture, some pasture that I had bought from, to have it developed? I don't know. Is somebody can help me out here, or?
Yeah, we would have to look up the specific property address and find it on the map, but.
Okay.
Because there is two people on the other side of where I live. They had just developed and they put a new fence up, and I'm talking for them too. There's in the pasture area that's undeveloped, which I didn't hear. Y'all tried to develop it 10 years ago, and it turned out to be a floodplain. Well, if it's going to be like an overlay map of something like people coming in, building a park in there. It's gonna ruin the effect, it's gonna ruin the wilderness, the animals, the deer, everything's gonna go completely at a downfall. And I wanna thank you very much. I hope everybody can get with me on it. And this whole thing, I love the beauty of making San Angelo beautiful. But then again, we have to really think about everybody else, is what they're going to do to their land and to their houses. And but thank you very much.
Ma'am, if you want, we'll get together
Thank
with
you,
you
Ms.
after
Hollis.
the meeting, and we'll get your address, and we'll help you figure out what's going on. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Uh-oh.
My name is Travis Meitzen. I live at 1701 Christoval Road. I have lived there for 43 years. Hobbs runs right into my driveway. I have a beautiful backyard. And to give you a little reason why some of the people are here, back in the late 70s or early 80s, there was a city council member named Weldon Serber who tried to put driveways and sidewalks in our backyards all along Christoval Road. It's sad, he died, so that never happened. We've had a good time living there and have really appreciated where we've been. And that's neither here nor there. But, you know, there have been attempts to put sidewalks in our backyard, and we don't want to see that happen. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Meitzen.
I could answer one of the concerns that's come up a few times, the question of why this land was included. I've heard 2 or 3 of the folks on Christoval Road with some concerns about what might happen on those properties since they are city-owned. And that's actually the reason we included those is any future development, let's say we wanted to create a park here, anything that would happen on those properties, if it's in the corridor, would then be reviewed, even if it's done by the city. If it's outside the river corridor, then the city could come in and do whatever they wanted, whatever we wanted with that property. In some ways, that's a protection for those folks on Christoval Road to know what would happen across the street from them or across the river from them. And they would, as Rebecca said earlier, they would get notice of any future development. Being outside the corridor, they wouldn't necessarily get that notice.
Thank you. Do you mind coming up to the mic, please?
Can you redraw the map prior to it going to July? I feel like once it's moved past this point, some of this is going to be fairly concrete. And I think that the property rights and the way you have the map are in conflict. We too own to the middle of the river. And I feel like if once you make this a statute or whatever you call it, once that happens, 10 years down the road, if my children live there and the river is down or they decide to do something different, they're going to come back and say, oh, no, your property doesn't go to the middle of the river anymore. That was resolved a number of years ago. It goes to the edge here where the water line was at that time. So I, for one, would like to see that redrawn correctly before it progresses on. And I think that's a legitimate request, to have it correctly mapped, okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reed.
Well, and as you all know, the short answer to that is we've brought you a recommendation from staff and the DHRC. Now the ball's in your court and whatever your prerogative is in terms of boundaries. Any of this is your recommendation, whatever that is today or at a future meeting, will be what goes to the city council.
Okay. We have any more public comment?
Good morning. I'm Rosalinda Tafoya, and I live at 60 East Highland. And we were sent this map as well that I didn't understand it, and I wonder how that will affect my property and the properties around there. My neighbors were all concerned because we always feel that the city's getting in our business. And so when it comes down to what color I paint my house, I love my house. I should be able to designate what I'm going to paint it or put a fence or whatever. And I understand when we live in this kind of zoning, it likes to be controlled. And I don't like being controlled on my property. That's why I pay taxes. And it's mine, and I've lived there for over 35 years. So how will this affect my property?
Where's your property again?
60 East Highland.
We'd have to look at exactly where the property is. It may be one of those properties that's already in the area. But again, it will be up to you all. A couple of things that have been suggested is exempting residential from the painting. That's something that could be considered. Yeah. So we'd have to look at your specific property address to know, and we'd be happy to, after the meeting, to get with you and do that. If
I don't
could a-
believe that she's in the corridor. I'm looking at this map. Chadburn's the 0 block, isn't it? Highland's just south of Washington Drive. So she's out. You would not be affected, ma'am.
Cultural district.
One of the things that I think John,
I think it's south of the
I think
cultural
one of the
district.
things
That's
that
what I'm
John
looking
had-
at. She's in that. I think she got noticed because she's within 200 feet of the boundary, but I think her property is technically outside of the boundaries.
Hi,
Yes, ma'am.
my name's Suzanne Elizabeth E.B. Martinez. I am within the corridor, but my question is not anything close to what the people have been asking. And excuse me if I don't end up very tactful. I'm not known for my tactfulness. Why are you wanting to expand on the river corridor anyway? I moved to the southeast section near the river and thought that San Angelo really only thought it owned the part across from the golf course. That's the only part that was ever taken care of. That part hasn't. And now you want to extend San Angelo ownership and widen the corridor on an area you don't really do a good job of taking care of. And I understand San Angelo Parks and Wildlife, but they're not doing a good job of caring for it now. Why do you want more that won't be taken care of?
I don't think that this has anything to do with property ownership. It's just about zoning.
It expanded on the river corridor. You've gotten more, you've widened that up, and you've taken more. Why?
Okay.
I mean, that's according to the maps and the drawings.
In some areas, but some areas we take in less, correct? I mean, there's a lot of areas up in the north, west side that we're eliminating out of the corridor.
And just to clarify, this has nothing to do with property ownership.
The San Angelo.
Okay.
City of San Angelo. And the corridor.
Okay.
Because you show on the maps.
The city's, the ownership
widened.
hasn't changed in any of this, is what I'm trying to say. What they're doing is, this is an overlay of zoning. There's no property ownership change of any kind associated with this.
Then I misread the map on the computer too, because
Okay.
it showed the before and it showed the river and the lines have extended beyond that
Okay.
section that was owned.
and what you saw on the computer
Yes.
showed what we were adding to what was already existing in the river corridor. It doesn't mean that the city has always owned it. In this case, what the reason why staff included it, I think that's what everybody's asking. Why did we
Okay.
include it? Because we wanted to make sure that this area that was either part of the river or adjacent to the river, if anything happened in this area, we would be required by the ordinance to let you know what was happening. Today, If the city wanted to come in and do something along the park, unless it needed special city council approval, you wouldn't find out. There would be no minimum requirement for notification. If this were to pass and this overlay were to be passed, you would be required, if you're within 200 feet of this area, to know exactly what was happening as it was going before DHRC, and if it was appealed, when it would go to city council. So staff's intent, to put it as simply as I can, is to protect not just the river, but the properties that are next to the river by letting you know, A, what's happening, and B, if you don't like it, where you can go to let people know that you don't like it. That was the only reason why staff did it the way that we did. Today, you wouldn't have that protection. Unless it had to go to city council, you would never know until it was actually being built or if it went before city council.
Okay,
Thank you, Ms. Martinez.
thank you.
Have any other public comment?
Good morning. My name is Jesse Barajas. I live off of North Adams Street. Currently, we are in the corridor and will remain in the new drawing. My only opinion is right now is that I don't agree with being told how we should have our property to appear. I understand beautification of the city is important to draw new residents to the city. I understand that. But as a property owner, I believe we should have a choice on what we can do to our own residential property, despite that we're less than 200 feet from the river itself. Many times we've received notices from the city saying, clean up or you'll be fined. If you don't do it, you'll be charged $300 an hour because we're going to do it for you. I'm a middle-class worker. I don't make the big bucks. I don't get big salary. I live paycheck to paycheck to feed my family and pay my bills. I live a simple life. None of y'all have probably gone to the neighborhoods to ask these people what they truly think. Most of the time they get those notices, they either get upset and they just deal with the issue and move on because they don't know who to talk to, who to speak with. My advice to you is, if you really want to know and do this right, is talk to the people who elected y'all into those offices. Again, I don't disagree with the beautification process, but I do disagree with having the right to do what we want as far as residential.
Thank you.
I have a question. I know a couple of years back they combined the DHRC and the River Corridor committees. I think now would be a good time to split those up again. Well, I mean, so that the DHRC doesn't have so much oversight. You know, the River Corridor is a large area, and there are residential properties in that area. But I've had run-ins with the DHRC. And I agree, they have absolutely too much control. And I think them having control of the entire river corridor is unnecessary.
That's something we can pass on to city council. I'll tell you the flip side, though, is if you're in the river corridor and historic property, that would mean two commissions you would have to go to get approval rather than one. So part of our process has been to try to simplify it so that you only have to get one approval instead of two or three.
So what's in the DHRC corridor or zoning district would not be included in the river corridor?
The three overlays with historically designated properties, the ones that have the placards or have either state designations or city designations, those were ones that require certificate of appropriateness. Those were the ones that had to go before the Historic Commission. The other one was the ones that were properties that were within the river corridor itself, that larger area that we've now scaled back. That was what the River Commission reviewed. The purpose that City Council had when they combined them both was, as John said, to simplify the process. Most of the properties that have those historical placards or those historical designations are already within the river corridor. And so instead of having, they just thought it was too much to have them go to two different boards and to set up two different boards, just go under one board and get one approval at one time, and it was
And probably 90% of the cases that are heard are river corridor cases, not the historic. So even if we split them, the river corridor would, or the DHRC would still be doing most of the work. You would just be adding that extra step for a property that happened to be historic also.
And if I could just make one addition, a lot of folks have come to talk about what the regulations are going to be. What are we, what are the rules we're going to have to follow? What are the rules we're going to have to go by? So the City Council had approved a document called the River Corridor Master Development Plan. Those are guidelines. And so one of the steps that we'll be doing, if and when this goes through, and even if this doesn't go through, we're still going to be looking at that document. When we revise that document, we're going to be having a series of meetings with all the people that will be affected through these areas to help us change that document so that it makes sense, so that it fits San Angelo, and so that you have a chance to be heard and be reflected within that document. So we'll be looking at what those regulations are later, and we'll be having several meetings with the community and several meetings before this commission and the DHRC, so there'll be lots of opportunities to be heard for those regulatory standards. Today, the only thing that we're looking at is creating these overlays, fixing a section of the ordinance that we think has overlap, and rezoning these sections so to reflect these maps that we're showing. Those are the only things that we're bringing before you today.
Want to hear from me again, Kendall Hirschfeld, but can I give a little bit of color on the combination of that when it came together? Again,
Yes.
I was sitting up there on council, so I was part of that coming together, and there was some logic and reasoning why. Again, Kendall Hirschfeld. The logic was that because I happened to have a building downtown, and so I had to go through multiple, and it was an old building that needed to be fixed up, cleaned up, all that kind of stuff. So I had to go through this committee and this committee and this committee, and literally it was 3 committees I had to go through to get things done. And I'm being ambiguous, but it was someone wanted this color pink, and this other one wanted it done this way, and this one wanted it done that way. What do we do? And so finally we had to go to each one and spend lots and multiple time getting all that pulled together where it was done. That was the logic and the reasoning, and that was the theory behind why all that came together. Now, that was for the river corridor, and then there was some other district in there too. Okay, and so when all this came together, that's when downtown San Angelo said, okay, now we want to include all our stuff in that stuff too. So now the central business district now joined in on that. So now it went from just the river corridor to now encompassing all of downtown. And that's how it got expanded. It wasn't because of anything in that area that was mandating something else get done. It was kind of at that point we were trying to do some revitalization in the downtown area, and so because this was well before some of the buildings had come up and started to make good improvements. So it was trying to create that standard. So that was just a little bit of the backstory and understanding of the logic, why it was put together, why it went together in that direction. Right or wrong, that's what it was. And I think to right to your point is that's exactly right, is that I think we've built this behemoth of, obviously I have a problem with the DHRC. I think we've built this behemoth of the DHRC that has too much control. Too much control. So I don't know how that could be controlled. Some of the other zones and stuff have a good principle and reasoning why you should be in a downtown area. So we can build the tax base, so we can build businesses, so we can have things come together and have it all improve in a systematic kind of fashion or organized kind of fashion. But anyway, that was just the question, the logic on how it all came together back in 2011, 12, somewhere back in there.
Thank you, Mr. Hirschfeld. We have any more public comment?
Mark Brown again. Just on this issue of multiple hearings before multiple bodies, I believe you could write the ordinance to say that a river corridor review committee reviews everything in the river corridor that's not in cultural or historic districts. If it's in cultural or historic, even though it's also in the river corridor, then it goes to the design committee. That's a relatively easy thing to do. If you wanted to have different approval for people outside those downtown districts, I think you could do it with a different commission.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any more public comment? Okay, I'm going to close the public comment and open discussion among us up here on the commission. So I serve on both the Planning Commission and the DHRC, and I agree with some of the comments about there being too much power at the DHRC. I think from my personal experience, having also dealt on the business side with going through the approval process, that there may be too much control. I think the intent and the idea is great. It's in development. I think having stable, predictable development patterns are good. Unpredictability and uncertainty create a lot of problems for developers. Developers tend to move away from areas where there are too many questions. So I think having a set of standards and trying to make more predictable development within the core of our community. And I think that the river is one of our most tremendous assets here. And I think some of these beautiful buildings downtown, as simple as some of them may seem, have a lot of significance to this community and appeal and charm. So for all of those reasons, I like having an overlay that has some sort of development standard. Having said that, going before the DHRC to propose any change to the outside of your building and being subjected to the opinions of the people on that board about exactly what kind of material to use or what color to use may be too much. I think the idea, though, is to keep people from maybe painting the outside of their building neon orange when the neighbor's got a beautiful building that's 100 years old that's maybe painted a color that's more in keeping with the age of that building. So finding a balance somewhere in between, I think, would be great. I think the zoning that's proposed and the areas that we're looking at makes sense to me. I don't think that this is overreaching or overbearing. The enforcement of the standards is, I think, where a lot of the focus from all of you out there is really going, and I tend to agree with you on that. So those are my comments.
I think when this was presented to us last month, and I think we're still staying in that same conversation with some of the comments from city staff. It was presented as basically an attempt at creating some efficiency and eliminating some duplication in some of the ordinances. I'm certainly in favor of that. I think it's something that we need to do. I don't think that there's any question that it's a confusing and difficult process for business owners to try to get anything done a lot of times. And so if we can try to improve that, I'm definitely in favor of that. At the same time, adding authority to the DHRC, which tends to stand in the way of that, is kind of counterproductive. So I think that's my comments.
Yep.
So I realize we're voting on the text and the map today, but voting on something and then saying we'll have the written ordinance to you later. It reminds me a little bit of national government and healthcare. And no one's going to be able to read it. So that's what I'm thinking. There should be a way that we could have that also when we vote on everything, instead of taking it partially to city council.
If I could answer that. We've referenced that because the thinking was this would allow us to create new regulations someday. We don't currently have in the works any of those changes. And so, again, a primary reason for this was to reduce and eliminate properties from the river corridor. And it's not like in 2 months you're going to see a revised ordinance. It likely would be 2 or 3 years at the earliest before you would see something. So I don't want those comments to imply that we're trying to push this through first and then, you know, we're going to quickly bring something else back. This sets us up to do that someday, but it is not on our to-do list today to bring something back. And I think, again, the reason we brought it up, we think cleaning up these boundaries, eliminating the areas that we're proposing to eliminate, and then, yes, including a couple of areas as well, we think that benefits the process today, whether we change the rest of the ordinance or not.
Anyone else have comments that they'd like to share with the commission?
I have not had to deal with the DHRC, just from what I've heard.
Yourself lucky.
Doesn't sound very fun. I do like how this new map has kind of rethought the boundaries, and especially like between the downtown district, because I don't think the river corridor should go all the way up through there. Just my personal opinion. So it separates those out, but it also sets you up to separate those committees back out, to where you have a downtown committee. You have a river corridor committee. You know how I think it was separated out before we combined them. But, how does that go about being done? I guess that has to go through council and whatnot. But I think that would ease everyone a little bit as well. So that's just my 2 cents. I don't know whether that.
I think the gentleman's comment about, if you fall within multiple committees, then you don't go to the river corridor. You just go to the DHRC. Right. I think
this sets that up for that.
Right. Yeah, and separating those committees back out, because I don't think it's necessary for folks that are in the river corridor but not in the DHRC or the historic to go before that committee. So,
correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea of having these 3 different boundaries, 3 different zones, was to, I guess, at some point down the road, maybe look at different standards within those zones. Is that correct?
Correct.
And have actual standards as opposed to guidelines.
Right.
In this case, instead of somebody being to say, well, I don't like.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. I think that's part of the problem. I think there's a relevant case that I heard on the DHRC earlier this week or last week that I want to share with you guys. So, this property owner had come before the DHRC with plans to make improvements to their facade on a building downtown. The DHRC approved whatever the recommendations were with the plans. That property owner went out and completely departed from what they had submitted and had approved. Changed the windows, changed the materials, changed the paint colors, everything. And then just went on about their business like it didn't matter. And so they come back, the case comes back, a citizen actually raises the point that it doesn't look to be consistent with the other development in that area. The case is brought back before us. They had used interior tile on the outside of their building, in a building that was 70, 80 years old, that was constructed out of brick. I think that's the intent of having standards, is to prevent things like that from happening. Is tile acceptable downtown? Sure, some of it is. If it's in keeping with the architecture and age of development, but putting bath tile on the outside of your building is probably not the most consistent use and design within that area. So having standards is great. To go back on that case, the city staff was asking the DHRC to have an opinion on what should be done with that building. And the response that we gave with my input was go back to the owners and have them propose what they want to do with it. We're not in the business of telling these property owners what they're going to put on the outside of their building, but what you've done to this building is not acceptable. And I think that that's, in my opinion, the direction that the DHRC should go, is to enforce standards and not have the personal opinions of the finishes and colors and designs from property owners that are trying to make a difference.
So with that, Travis, we've had a lot of talk about DHRC lessening their control.
Yes.
How can we do that? Period. Question.
And I'll just say, I think you would have some input on that, and if that's something you'd like us to bring back.
This is coming to us and it's adding more power to them than this would be in our.
It's actually not. Again, today you're really just looking at the boundaries. And at your last meeting, what you did was actually take some authority away from the DHRC and give it to staff so that we could review and approve many of these things. And I'll just, as a reminder, the ordinance allows anything from the DHRC to be appealed to City Council. So if a property owner believes that they were an incorrect decision was made by the DHRC, that can be appealed to City Council as a safety valve. But in terms of the ordinance changes, most of them have taken authority away from the DHRC, given it to city staff to help address some of the concerns that you all have raised.
I think you've given some administrative approval, and basically for signage in the text amendments, but reduced the square footage to 0, basically, and up for review by DHRC, and then basically given them an unlimited amount of time to make a decision. So I have a problem with those two things.
Again, this may sound strange, but I think that having less authority for the DHRC and having more clear standards within these areas is the direction that I'd like to see it go, personally. And if we have the authority as the Planning Commission to do that, then I think we should look at that.
If you put standards in place, then it's that or nothing.
Right.
And I don't think that's appropriate.
What do you mean?
I think the way that everything's changing in the world, what my idea of redoing the outside of my building, if it doesn't fall within your standard, then it's not going to happen, I think is unreasonable.
Right.
Why we're going to be bringing standards forward after we review it with the community, with citizens, with businesses, with different boards, with different entities. I think following along that line, we want to have something that fits within River Corridor.
I don't think you should have standards. You might have guidelines, but if it doesn't fall within that, you can still present it for consideration.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can still do that now.
Yeah. And if you have standards and you're departing from those standards, you'd have the right to make a case to the DHRC about.
I think those standards need to be very broad, very, very broad.
And that's the rub. And again, I think I want to try to bring us back to today. We're just looking at these boundaries.
Yes.
And a couple of minor text amendments. But I mean, I've heard two different opinions here. One is the standards need to be more specific so somebody knows what they can and can't do. Another opinion is let's make them general guidelines that can be applied. And that's the rub with any of these, and all cities struggle with that. But that's something that when we do bring back standards or guidelines, that definitely will be part of the conversation.
Okay. Anyone else with comments?
No, not
without being redundant.
And just a reminder, you will have to take, there are a total of 5 changes, 2 text amendments, and 3 separate rezonings. Those will have to be voted on independently.
Okay. So text amendment 3A, public hearing. This is the zoning ordinance creating a new river corridor district overlay, downtown district overlay, and cultural district overlay, identifying their purpose, applicability, and review procedures. Would that be item 1?
Yes. And again, that's not the boundaries, but that's splitting the one river corridor into 3 separate districts, is all that text amendment does.
Okay. Does everyone understand what we're trying to do? Would anyone like to make a motion?
Motion to separate the 3 overlays into separate areas.
Okay.
Does this extend into the newer, the extending of the river corridor and?
This creates the
Over.
districts. You'll vote
Okay.
separately on the boundaries in a minute.
So we have a motion to separate the river corridor into 3 distinct zones, being the river corridor district, the downtown district, and the cultural district.
I make the motion.
We have
A motion.
We have a motion here, so
Second.
we have a second. So we have a motion and a second. Let's have a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Nay.
6-1. Okay, item 2 is the text amendment to the zoning ordinance revising the existing standards for section, is it 211? Is that correct? Historic overlay zone and section 308, historic overlay zone, to clarify the process for when a certificate of appropriateness is required on properties in historic districts or containing historic landmarks.
This,
Can we see those again?
this is really just a cleanup of the ordinance. There are currently 2 sections that deal with historic overlay, and there's duplication. And so it's eliminating text in one section and moving some text to the other section. So this one is not, number one, it's not related to the river corridor stuff at all. It's only related to historic overlays, and it's cleaning up the ordinance language.
Okay?
Wasn't there another piece to this? Wasn't this where we changed the date?
That's right. So before, it used to be you'd have to have the hearing within 45 days for a certificate of appropriateness. That's being removed.
Just the certificate of appropriateness.
That's right.
And that was because of holidays and the calendar. It's hard for us to schedule it, and so we would have to have a special meeting. And so in that case, it was just to get rid of that requirement and then just to push it forward to the next available DHRC.
And if that's a concern, you could recommend a change to either increase from 45 to 60 days or, or say something like, in some of our ordinances, it says the next available meeting.
So I'll make a motion to approve this and change the date to 60 days.
Okay? So
It's
item
also-
3,
Is this also where we remove the square footage requirement? Or is that the next? Yeah, dropping from,
that was done in a prior meeting,
The square footage.
from 1,200,
the review.
No, that's correct. That's not in, as part of this. That,
Okay.
that was actually what you guys
Okay.
considered at your last
Okay.
meeting.
Last meeting. So we have a motion to accept everything except item 3, which would change to 60 days.
And the only issue we might have there is if we had a problem getting quorum for a meeting. that's reasonable. I mean,
Okay.
So, just to be clear, they have to make the decision within 60 days of the receipt of the application. Okay,
Yes.
hear the case, I'm sorry, hear the case.
In the case within
Yes,
60 days of the application.
And it was 45, is that right? So why do we want to take it to 60? If you want to speed things up, why not
They
shorten
were
the
having
distance?
either holidays or meeting quorum. I mean, that at least gives 60 days. It gives 2 full months to meet that
I
requirement.
don't agree with it. I think that if you're having a problem on one of these committees that we've got, which first of all, we've got entirely too many, but if you're having a problem getting a quorum on a committee, then that is a problem with that committee, and that needs to be discussed with the council people who are approving them or who are appointing them. So if you're going to take the time to do either Planning Commission or DHRC or any of the other ones that folks are having to go to through this arduous process, if there's a problem with quorums, there's a problem within the committee. So we either need to counsel whomever is doing the appointing to those seats. If there are problem people that are not showing up to meetings, well, we do a lot of homework to be on this commission, and so every one of those committees should be doing the same thing and showing respect to the citizens that we serve. So if you're going to accept the appointment on a committee, then you are taking that responsibility on. So we don't need to be creating more time and allowing more time on the back end because committee folks aren't showing up. So, you know, if I'm a council person and I'm here, or if I'm a council person, I'm watching this later on YouTube, if there's an issue on that, then they need to be looking at that, in my opinion. But I would never get behind dragging this thing out another 15 days, 20 days, because we're having problems with people showing up to meetings. If you're not showing up, get off.
Thank you.
So as it stands today, with the way the rules are written, it's 45 days. Is that correct? So if DHRC is required to meet within that 45-day period and they don't, what happens?
You have to call a special meeting, right? Well, then call a special meeting.
I think
So leave that, I would say leave that, I'll take that back. Make a motion to approve without changing that one
the time
item
frame.
and leaving it at 45 days.
and the answer is it would be approved automatically if they hadn't made a decision or hadn't heard the case within 45 days.
Okay.
Even better.
So I make a motion to approve as long as you leave the 45-day clause in that one particular ordinance.
So we're going to strike the change in item 3 to 11G. Approve everything except item 3 is the motion. So by not changing item 3, we're going to leave it at 45 days. Okay.
Correct.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
A second by Mr. Brooks. So let's have a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right, 7-0. All right, now we're down to rezones. River Corridor District. This is to apply the River Corridor Overlay Zoning District to approximately 4,439 acres of property generally located along the Concho River from the eastern to western city limits, including properties that directly adjoin or in a maximum of 2,275 feet from the river's edge. So again, the text is not really applicable. It's the map that we're approving. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so River Corridor map. Any discussion on changes? Does everyone like the way it's laid out? Do we have a motion? Any discussion?
Well, so I think if I had, my number one concern would be that some of the folks that came up here to speak were sort of unclear as to exactly, what I want to make sure is that those folks and the folks that will later watch this are clear as to what is about to happen, because I don't want any preconceived notions and anybody getting upset because it's not fully understood exactly what this is, this decision isn't going to start changing colors of homes, right? So my only concern is that everybody who took the time to come up here and speak completely understands what this means, so there's not any confusion. That would be my only fear, is that there's not 100% understanding.
And I would say, as far as understanding goes, the possibilities of property risk infringements, difficulties with the processes and guidelines, and the unintended consequences, I'm probably going to make the motion not to approve.
Second.
And let me remind you that there is a river corridor today, and so denying this does not remove the current river corridor.
It's just not expanding it.
It's not expanding it, but it's also not removing properties that we've recommended removing from the corridor.
Yeah. It's a catch-22. It does some good and it doesn't. That's why I wanted to make sure that everybody that showed up today was clear.
Can we table the rezoning till the next meeting?
You could, and what I would
Have a
suggest
motion
is
and a
if,
second on the floor.
Yeah, you have a motion and a second.
if Mr. Brooks's motion, I would at least suggest that it be reworded to create the new river corridor boundary, because there's some legal issues for where we're moving it into a different part of the ordinance, but to modify the boundary to the existing boundary or some other boundary as you would recommend, rather than simply denying it. Because again, if we deny it, we go back to the river corridor that's already in place today.
So basically, though, we could go back and remove on the north end the properties that are removed off of this one and not add the ones on the south end.
Correct.
Yes.
So you could exclude, for example,
Or the
everything
east.
south of
Didn't you
Avenue
expand
S.
it eastward as well?
Yeah, now all of these properties, it's currently, if it's a little hard to see, but there's a boundary that's, I don't know the distance, it's some distance back from the river, and so we just expanded it to include all of those, more of those properties back from the river, if that makes sense. So the biggest additions are here, these areas. There's a little bit here, and there's some more in other places, but for the most part, that's the expansions.
So John, so to make the glass half full, right, instead of half empty, if I am a citizen sitting out there right now and I live or own property in one of those circles that you just drew, what's my benefit? If this passes today, what is my benefit?
They'll get notice of anything
that
happens.
You get a phone call when the city wants to put a playground across the street or across the river.
Benefits them knowing what's going to happen on their neighboring properties.
And an opportunity to speak up before
An opportunity to speak up. As has been discussed, it also puts their properties under review if they propose to do any construction or painting of an existing building.
But all of the single-family homes on Christoval Road are outside of the boundary.
Correct.
Right.
Okay, for example, you said something about a dock. Do they have to get a building permit for a dock?
Today you would.
You'd have to get a building permit.
So you're going to have to go get permission to build a dock anyway, correct?
Yes, but whether or not you could put the dock there would
Would
come
have to
into
be
question.
reviewed. Right.
This would
I'm
add an
just
extra
saying.
step. It would have to be reviewed by the DHRC. Again, a couple of options. You could exclude all of this added area. You could, as has been suggested, redraw to the
Take it to the
property line at the center of
property
the
line.
river. Yeah, that's up
I
to
just
you.
wanted to clarify that, because that's a valid point.
Again,
That's
I
an
would-
extra step they'd have to go through in building a dock.
Yes.
Right. I would recommend that you modify the boundary and approve it rather than simply deny it, though.
Yeah, I agree with that.
He's not speaking yet.
He's waiting.
He's thinking.
He's thinking about what he's
I'm thinking.
Public comment is closed at this time. Thank you.
I rescind my proposed motion so we can exclude some of the properties.
Okay, me too.
Okay?
To remove the north and the south ends.
Are we going to make a new motion? Is that what you're saying, Rebecca?
That's what he's
Yes.
doing.
Okay, so we have no motions on the table at this time. Do we have a new motion? Okay.
I make the motion to approve the new rezoning, but not as proposed, to exclude the newest boundaries.
Talking about the south
make
and the
sense?
east? The extensions to the south and to the east?
Yes.
He can't on his, but so this area and all of the expansions here?
Yes.
Yes.
I second that. So in that, the north is, as you said, that is as on the map, some of those that have been removed.
So we have a motion to accept the boundaries of the river corridor overlay as proposed, except that we're not expanding southward or eastward.
So I would say south of Avenue L.
South of Avenue L.
And
so the old boundary was Avenue L.
Correct.
Okay.
And east of, or no changes east of Bell Street, I guess is what we're saying?
No change east of Bell Street. We have a motion and a second. Let's have a vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? None. 7-0. All right, now we're on to the downtown district. So this is the downtown overlay zoning district of approximately 552 acres of property. It's generally located north of Neff's Way, east of South David Street, south of Houston Hart, and west of North Emmerich. Any comment on the boundaries for the downtown overlay?
No, they're asking themselves.
Each other.
They're asking each other.
Anyone want to comment on the boundaries? I take it the light blue is the old boundary?
Correct.
And the purple is the new boundary?
Correct. And it is coterminous with the river corridor through that entire area.
So we don't have properties that have two
Correct.
zones.
It does not overlap.
No overlap.
We did previously, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
What was the previous downtown?
Light blue is the old boundary.
But that's River Corridor, isn't it?
Yes.
That was what was considered as part of the Central Business District overlay, which required a certificate of appropriateness. So it was actually that piece plus the river corridor is still what was reviewed by the DHRC. So what we're proposing is to take that which required a certificate of appropriateness and extend it this way to encompass what was in the river corridor before, but now we're calling it Central Business District. So we're taking the two and we're putting them into one.
Again, part of the purpose is to simplify it and not
Yeah,
have
you're making it easier.
overlapping districts and that sort of thing.
So is this taking in more land from previous?
Yes. This is the existing boundary, roughly. So all of these areas would be added to the downtown. Again, the longer-term purpose of this is to create some downtown standards that would apply throughout the downtown, and this is roughly the area that the city's comprehensive plan designates as downtown.
So yes and no, because they were already in the river corridor. Now they're just going to be in the downtown district as opposed to the river corridor.
No, they've expanded it. The river corridor is the light blue. That's all that river corridor was, or DHRC. Let's call it DHRC because it's both downtown and river corridor. You can see some area on the western portion of this boundary where they've encompassed a couple of city blocks, several city blocks that were outside of the zone district that would now be included.
And so roughly this area is being added.
I'm going to draw. I'm sorry. Cunningham, what we know where the Motel 6 is and where the McDonald's is, that road gets split. And so the left side, as you're driving towards, I'm going to say the Walmart because that's where everybody knows. If you're driving towards Walmart, if you look on the left-hand side where Motel 6 is, everything on that side is controlled by the River Corridor sign all the way up to, I think it's the front 25 or 30 feet of where the McDonald's is. If you draw a line 30 feet into their property, it arbitrarily cuts through those properties. All of that is within the River Corridor sign area, which is confusing to everybody. And then if you take that part all the way back, you're not within the River Corridor sign area. So one of the purposes that we're doing is to clean up things that are in multiple areas where the River Corridor is split into River Corridor and River Corridor sign. What we've tried to do is we've tried to clean all of those areas up, which are already in the River Corridor, and try to have one set of rules, what you have to do, one set of understandings if you have to go to DHRC or if you have to have something administratively approved, expanded the review of what can be done administratively. So if you're on the Motel 6 site, you have one place to go. If you're on the McDonald's site, you have one place to go and one set of rules to follow.
I'll make a motion to approve.
So this area shown is roughly the area that is not currently in any corridor.
Yeah, just to clarify, your red line delineating the western boundary needs to jog west. It's Abe Street, not Cohenheim.
The confusing part is the river corridor ends at the blue, but there's an extended river corridor area where only signage is reviewed,
Yes.
and that's in this area.
But we're including that
Yes.
in the downtown overlay. All right.
Correct.
Okay. So
I make the motion to deny.
we have a motion to approve. Do we have a second to approve? Okay, that motion has failed. We now have a motion to deny.
Second.
And again, like I mentioned before, we just took this out. Your previous vote was to take this out of the river corridor. So if your concern is keeping the blue, then the motion would need to be to approve it with different boundaries. To deny it would be to say that all of the purple area completely comes out of the review process for anything within that area.
See, this is part of my issue, is if it's this complicated for us, could you imagine if you were trying to do something as a citizen?
Again, the purpose of this
I
is
mean,
to
this
simplify.
is like,
Commissioners, I just want to add one thing, not completely, but those boundaries that are being expanded, again, not completely, but they're generally consistent with the downtown area in the city's comprehensive plan. So that was
Yes.
another reason we looked at it.
And that's an important distinction because city council designated everything that you see within that purple as a downtown future lane use designation. So we followed as best as we could. We didn't take it entirely because the downtown goes out further. So we took a very limited scope of what the city council designated as the downtown future lane use.
Motion is second on the floor.
We do have a motion and second on the floor. We've lost a commissioner temporarily, and I'm wondering if we should wait for him to return before we take a vote.
Let me restate. I would make the motion to approve, and this isn't the proper way to say it, but as long as we can stay within the blue boundaries.
Keep it the same.
Does that make sense?
That part of downtown.
So we have you were to modify your motion to approve it based on the old boundaries of downtown,
Yes.
Boundaries of the central business district overlay.
using the existing boundaries of the central business district overlay,
Yes.
which is the baby blue.
okay, I can get behind you on that. I'll second that. I'll keep my second.
It was Joe
Okay.
Spano.
So we have a motion and a second to keep the boundaries for downtown, the CBD overlay. Let's have a vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. All opposed? None. Okay, it's going to be 6-0. All right, last item, the cultural district overlay, 64 acres. The general boundaries are Highland to the east, located north of East Highland, east of Russ Street, south of Bakers Street, and west of Hill Street. Any discussion on the boundaries for the cultural district among the commissioners? This is commonly referred to as Old Town, is that right?
Yes.
Are these the boundaries of Old Town?
More than just Old Town.
Yeah. So where is Old Town? Y'all have the boundaries for that?
That top, northwest,
Taylor?
where that triangle comes down. So it's basically all the yellow north of that green triangle.
All of the yellow north of the green triangle. Got it.
Draw that, Hillary.
Okay.
All this yellow is the existing Old Town District, and then the yellow you see here would be Fort Concho.
Is all of the yellow that's the existing Old Town District part of the DHRC?
It's historically overlaid.
None of the Fort area
It is,
is
the fort,
part.
the fort requires a certificate of appropriateness as well because it's historically overlaid. So currently, if they make any improvements to the fort or to Old Town, they come to the DHRC currently.
Okay.
So the boundary she just drew,
Yep.
plus anything in the brighter yellow, all goes to DHRC now.
Okay.
I make the motion to approve the rezoning within the colored overlay. Does that make sense?
Not to extend it to the
Not to extend it.
To maintain its boundaries.
Yes.
second.
So we have a motion and a second to make the cultural overlay boundaries the same as the old boundaries for this area. That's really confusing.
Aren't you cutting out the museum?
The old town, yeah, part of the old town is now in the river corridor, isn't it?
No, we cut out the museum. We took that from the river corridor and we put it into the cultural,
Okay.
so not currently. It's currently in the river corridor.
Yeah.
So it needs to be,
Still is in the river corridor then.
it's still in the river corridor.
So we need to have it
Or is it?
included in the cultural.
It's not in the river corridor.
It's in the new river corridor.
It's not. Got it. Can we draw on this? No, we can't. There you go. Basically that.
Yes.
Just to clarify, that would include city-owned property that's not currently in the boundary, which I think is fine, but just so it's clear, these lighter yellow areas are owned by the
Yes.
city but aren't currently regulated. This would
That'd be
pull
great.
them in.
Now, in this, is it, if Howard were here, and he's already left, but
He's up here. He's here.
Howard, do we need to include museum with the cultural overlay, or does it need to be in the river corridor? Yes.
If you could speak into the mic, Howard.
Please come up.
Hi, Howard Taylor, Director of the Art Museum. I would prefer that the museum be included in the cultural district because we are the leader and manager of the state designated San Angelo Cultural District. So that would be logical. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It is.
The
sir.
commission has the prerogative to ask questions of citizens even when the public hearing's closed.
I want to hear from you. What do you have to say? The podium's yours.
Come up to the podium.
Okay.
No, it's not.
I'm
This is what we're voting on.
He was asked a direct question from a commissioner.
Okay, so let's clarify the boundaries, Mr. Brooks, that you're proposing in your
Okay, I
motion.
make the motion to approve the rezoning within the covered overlays and also include the museum in the cultural overlay map.
So by doing that, we need to take it out of the river corridor.
So apparently you cannot revote on the river corridor. However, we can, what I'm hearing is by including that in the cultural district, you'd prefer to see it out of the river corridor. We can take that information to city council when we take it to them.
Okay.
With the staff recommendation to do what you just said.
Okay.
Remove it with this motion?
I'm sorry?
Can we not remove it out of the river corridor with this
No,
motion?
because it's a separate case that you already approved.
Okay. Do we need to include it in our motion here to put it in the cultural district? Yes.
Yes, and you could add with direction to staff to recommend to council to remove it from the river corridor.
Okay, in that case, I make the motion to approve the overlay, the colored overlay within the cultural overlay map only, and to ask that administrators go to city council and get the museum overlay, colored overlay, in the cultural overlay map as opposed to the river corridor.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to accept the boundaries generally drawn in red on the map that we're looking at, generally. Let's have a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Done, 7-0. All right, director's report.
Don't have anything to add.
Nothing.
Today.
All right. Future meeting agenda and announcements. The next regular meeting of the Planning Commission is tentatively scheduled to begin at 9 a.m. on Monday, June 18th in City Council Chambers of the McNeese Convention Center at 501 Rio Concho Drive. Do I have a motion to adjourn? All right. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. None opposed.